I'm Dr. Howie Jacobson, and this is the Plant Yourself Podcast. Each week, I bring you a conversation with someone who's making a positive difference in the world. And for my day job, I help leaders and their teams master their mindsets so they can achieve great things. To find out more, check out the Mindset Mastery Memo, my Substack newsletter. You can find it at plantyourself.com/memo. And now, today's show. Dr. Richard Hodge, welcome back to the Plant Yourself Podcast.
Hey, thank you so much, Howie. It's good to continue and see if we can round out this conversation today.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I posted another episode, and one of the things I do is I go through the video and I look for a screenshot where like both of us are smiling and our eyes are open, and you just came in strong with like with happy vibes. So this should be easy. Now I'm just trying to remember to keep my eyes open so we get a good shot. So welcome back. We've had two conversations
Yes.
leading up to the more complex one, and today I think you wanted to talk about sort of the 4-quadrant model, which I am using all the time. It's almost like it's the hot knife that, it's microwaving, heating up the knife so that it cuts through the butter of my problems, because without it, I can tend to approach them from anywhere, and I kind of make progress eventually, but it's slow and haphazard, whereas starting with these 4 quadrants really gives me clarity. So as much as I hate to share it with other people because it's such a competitive advantage, I am an attention whore, and it's a beautiful thing that you're sharing with the world. So I'd love to get into it when you're ready.
Yeah, well, look, I've been in the systems engineering community for 30 years or so, and they're well known for getting big things done and working artfully together to make things happen, bringing multiple companies and whatever else together through those processes. But distilled down, it comes down to 4 groups of questions. Those that drive meaning, that are around the why, those that are drive connection, that are around the how do we keep the things that need to stay together, then actually the what type questions of what we're going to do, and then if we do that, will it have the impact? So it's all those if type questions that invite test and evaluation. To me, that really helps simplify what can be some of the most challenging problems that we face.
Yeah. So when you say what drives what, like the how drives connection, to me that's not at all obvious upon hearing it. So I'm sort of nodding politely, but I'm like, what's he talking about? So maybe can you talk a little bit before we get into it, like how you arrived at this model? Because one of the things you do is you wade through a ton of complexity to come up with something simple on the other side. And I would love to kind of get a sense of how you do it.
Well, it did start with a systems engineering model, and I was invited to provide some support to a general within the Australian Department of Defence who had 4 new divisions, one looking at why we need defence at all, one looking at what it is, how defence operates in this world of Australia, and 3, what it is defence really needs to do, and then 4, if we did that, could we achieve it successfully? And I used that model, and instead of just taking those main elements of systems engineering, I just simply put the labels against it of, instead of needs, requirements, and form, and test and evaluation, I simply used why, what, how, and if. And that just made conversations with executives so much easier. So why do we need a defense force? And you can ask, all right, this was my context as to how I started, but delete defense if that's not your bag and put in a health organization or Red Cross or community service organization or your local school or whatever.
Or vacation, right?
Or indeed a vacation. However, vacation is an answer, right?
Well, maybe. I mean, for me, it's like, oh wait, we're all going away. Why?
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
to ask the question.
You're exactly right. But why? Then what does that do? And then how does that do it? And that's a thinking process. Then you go to the test and evaluation. If we did that, implemented that solution, would it give us what we expected at the outset? It's the thing that drives meaning, and so the why attaches to meaning. The what attaches more to the actual product or service that you're actually going to deliver, and the how to the experience, and then you're just testing as to whether or not what you've chosen as the product is actually going to deliver the meaningful experience that you expect. And you can think of that in capability terms. I was trying to relate. You sort of derailed my thinking a little by tossing in a vacation instead of something complex like a defence organisation. But
You've never travelled with me. If you think a vacation is not as complex as a military operation.
Well,
right.
Yes.
But I also want to give people practice in applying this in small ways to see, personally, to see its utility, because that's largely how I've been applying it.
Right.
As I develop skill.
Yes.
Right. Because it's not a habit of mine to say, why am I doing this?
Right. But then that really ties into, it's one of the best questions that we learn to ask as a 3-year-old. Right, incessantly, and yet by the time we've been through our primary school years, almost we've forgotten, or it's been. I think Sir Ken Robinson, who's since passed, his TED talk is one of the top TED talks on in the world on how schools will kill creativity. And that's what happens, and it actually kills that questioning of why, and I think that's critical to actually, achieving a meaningful change to deliver the sort of meaningful life that we want, and that we're always in, like Viktor Frankl's in search of meaning. It's meaning that we're as humans in search of frequently. So that's why a why question is pretty vital. So that's really where we would start. So now what sort of my temptation is to jump into some of the big topics, because my the handle on my website is no problem too big for us to act and leave the world better for what we've done. Your desire is to try and say, well, look, yes, okay, we can deal with big problems like growth and degrowth, or climate change, or elimination of poverty and the like, or can we apply that same process of thinking to something that's more personal and something to which we as individuals can then attach ourselves to, and I think that well, I know that we can. And I know that the same fundamentals exist, that we are looking for answers to why. In fact, we're in search of meaning. And if we're in search of meaning, then why questions are the best ones to get us there. If we're in search of connection, then how questions are really the ones to focus on, because it explores the relationships, right? Not just the parts. But then when we want a piecewise perspective, then we can get into the what questions, because then we can get into, well, making it very tangible that I'm talking about doing this in this situation, right? And then if type questions go, well, if we take that thought and make it real, will it deliver and contribute to deliver the meaning that we're seeking? And that's just the nature of the quadrant. And we can go through that in a, constant infinity loop from why, how, what, if. And that's the nature of life.
Yeah. So my inclination is to let you run with the examples that you're very familiar with, and that the models that you've have developed within, and then I'll probably think of a problem in my life that I want your help with, so we can kind of do it at scale.
All right. Well, let's have a look now. I know this is a podcast, so I'll try doing my best to talk this through. But what I like to do is to provide some visual cues for the people that I'm talking with, as I typically, engage in this in either a mentoring or an advisory or an exploratory capacity, because it's those visual cues that help us relate the why to the how to the what to the if, and see the infinity and the connection between those four ways of thinking. So
I will people listening to this, I will have added to the introduction that I recommend that this is a visual, that this is a YouTube rather than a jog around the block podcast.
Right. Yeah.
So, and people will do with that what they will.
Splendid. All right. Well, we'll do our best for those poddies who just like to listen, to talk through it coherently as we go. So I need to switch over to there, and I've got the four quadrants, which simply in the top right. So all I've drawn is a cross on a piece of paper, and I typically like to do this on an A3, or if you're in the imperial sizes, a folio size piece of paper, or a A4 and quarto will not give you as much space, but that's okay. You don't need a huge amount of space to do these, because and I've drawn a quadrant, just a pair of crosshairs to divide the folio into four sections. And the top right, we're talking about the why. The bottom left, how. Top left, what. And the bottom right is the if. And we're going to cycle through these from the why to the how to the what to the if, so that we end up with that sort of infinity loop that enables us, as we've learnt, to revisit the why, revisit the how, change the what, and indeed change the actions that we might put into the if column. And it's that then that enables us ultimately to build a learning cycle that connects meaning to action. And that's essentially what we're about. So I'm going to zoom in onto the Y quadrant, and I'm going to draw a simple ladder of that that will ask you just to fill in with 5 words. And typically it's almost like a sentence completion test. And if we're talking about a business that feels that, you know, it's could do with some change and some shift, then I will ask them to say, you know, my business is, and give me a word that describes the state of the business, and I feel, how do you feel about that state? And I'm quite deliberate in seeking something that's an objective statement of the state of the business, or and an emotional measure, you know, that's quite subjective, but it goes to, you know, driving the meaning as to why you want to change, that you're not prepared to put up with the status quo anymore. And in one organization, you know, they were really, we were dealing with a new governance framework, and they, you know, really felt that they had taken a very much an ad hoc approach to their regulation, and they felt more as though they were acting in a as constabulary, you know, that they felt as enforcers, and they felt really as though it was a case of, you know, exercising power over people, and it was not the sort of relationship that they actually wanted in the regulatory world. Then I said, well, let's looking ahead, you know, once we go through this change program, and ask, well, if this change, whatever that might be, is successful, how would you like the state of the organization to be? And their sense was that actually that it would work really quite systemically, that we would understand the relationships amongst everything, and that we would not, you know, all of this ad hocery would have disappeared. And indeed, they would feel as collaborators, not as constables. Oh, and I can't spell. I'm not going to let that stand. Collaborators. And then the issue was, well, in order to go from ad hocery to a systemic state, so that you feel less of a constable and more of a collaborator, what was the breakthrough issue? And that actually came down to something that on an organizational state, really, that they would have at least get to the point where everyone was compliant with one approach to regulation and governance, instead of having all of this ad hocery. Well, can we agree on one way forward? And then once we get to a state of compliance, then we can work on how we get beyond compliance. So that then enabled us to look at, well, what was the program that was going to achieve that first piece of compliance, but more importantly then, having achieved that, how do we then shift the organization beyond compliance so that the regulator was more a collaborator? And
so can I jump in there for a second?
Please.
Yeah, so I'm picturing that you go in, you sit them down, and you say, so what's the state now? And they say, oh, we're ad hoc. And you say, how does that make you feel? And you say, we feel like constables. But I'm sure it didn't happen like that. So I'd love to kind of sort of like unscrew your brain. And like if I ask people how they feel about a state, as let's say as a consultant, and I'm working with a business, and there's these veneers of professionalism, they'll either like not understand the word feeling, and just come up, or
And that is
they'll
true.
right. Like, so when you say like I feel constabulary, that's not the same as saying I feel shame or I feel
No.
fear.
So it was a mix, because it was a large organization. There was a mix of feelings, but by and large, people didn't like, they didn't feel the value in their job of actually helping the organization forward, through being, that they felt more inclined to disengage because they disliked the constabulary nature of the work. So they were feeling disengaged. They were feeling frustrated that they wanted to be far more collaborative in helping the organization get beyond compliance. And so that notion of constables came about as through a group conversation that was, like a metaphor for them to go, yeah, that's exactly what's causing us to feel disengaged, frustrated, and and not attuned to advancing the organization, whereas we would feel far more empowered, almost like a partner in progress, if we could be seen and act in a more collaborative frame.
So I can see how you're getting them to create meaning in this quadrant, right? Because
That's
like
right.
frustrated and disengaged doesn't necessarily have meaning attached to it that can generate progress, right? But when when they say, oh, from constabulary to collaboration, then that kind of
constable to a collaborator, then that was a simple turn of phrase for them to go, yeah, that shift embodies the sort of feeling I want to, so now what do I, that brought to the emotional engagement, right? That really empowered them to becoming, to actually begin to own the change program that they were about to design, because they hadn't even designed it at this point, right?
Got it.
Yeah. Well, then, what, where we next go in this little thing is down to, well, how does that happen? And I'm going to draw some circles over the, and actually I'll draw them down here first. And I like Venn diagrams of 3 circles for a good reason. And that is that within each circle you can put one idea. And that if you're trying to have a conversation about then how do you move from ad hoc to systemic, how do you get people to feel less of the constable and more of the collaborator, then you can't shift, any more than 3 new ideas sort of breaks the human brain at once, and it needs those in place before you can then change. So I bring the 3 circles up and overlay them on there to say, well, I need to look at how something might change in the way we're thinking about this. Something might change in the way in which we act, and something might change in the way in which we control. And those are the main things that we want. Now, another way of saying that, and you've noticed I've just turned the model around. Is to say that we needed to actually, how do we actually make the shift? Is changing something in the way in which, well, it helps if I have a pencil, in the way in which we think about it and strategize, ways in which we do the operations or the execution, and the ways in which we apply the governance, and that provides the control, and it's that governance then that drives, you know, towards and beyond compliance. But it's more about shifting the focus onto their behaviour rather than on the actual regulation itself. So the way in which we thought about the strategy, well, in fact, it was more from a governance perspective to begin with, because we had to break through this issue and moving people from 1001 black letter regulations, which was driving the constabulary nature. Hey, you're breaking these rules. Hey, you're breaking these rules. To going, well, look, what is the one singular objective that binds us? And then how do we put control measures in place? How do we put control measures in place that enables everyone to focus on that outcome? Now, this was in a naval example. So one thing that we could agree, that for every aspect of maritime operations, we could agree, everyone could agree on one objective, and that was to maximize the operational capability of the mission system for the task that it's being given, while eliminating or minimizing harm to people, the public, and the environment. And you go, wow. Now, everyone could sign up to that, because they then were looking at their own mission systems that they controlled. They were all given their own tasks that set the context in which they were going to use it, and then asked, how are you going to maximize the operational effectiveness for your mission system, given the tasks that it's got to do and that it's been directed by government, while minimizing the harm to people, public, and the environment, or eliminating the harm. And that was superb, and that became the cornerstone for the regulatory strategy. So it then shifted from, here's all of the regulations that you must follow, to here is a policy framework that is has an outcome focus and is goal-based, so it had a number of goals, and then they were asked how they were going to meet the goals. And then the governance framework wasn't a case of hitting them over the head, but actually going to them and saying, you know, you tell me whether or not you did what you said you would do. And if not, why not? So it just completely shifts. The strategy was to completely shift the nature of the conversation. And you could see then its direct impact. We didn't have to work out the operations of the mission systems. That was for them to do. So it took that, the regulator, right out of their world, except in a collaborative sense of having that conversation, of making sure they were still consistent in delivering the enterprise outcome.
Okay, so
does that make sense?
It's. I'll tell you what makes sense, and then you can fill me in on where. So my main question is: are these three words in the Venn diagram, so strategize, governance / control and operations, are they universal, or is that what you came up for this particular situation, or would it be for any organization?
Is that it can be universal, because we wanted it to filter down in ways in which, how can that be interpreted at the highest level of the organization, where we're concerned with the health of it? How can that be interpreted at the middle level of the organization that was largely setting policy frameworks? And how could that be interpreted at the sharp end, where they were actually exercising the mission systems? And then further, how could each and every one of us go, but how am I, in my work, living to that outcome and controlling my behavior in accordance with the goals of the organization? And that really then shifted it so that everyone was able to interpret and change the way they were thinking and strategizing, the way they were working and operating, and the way in which they exercised self-control, as well as how they exercised operational and tactical control over their work to raise issues up. Because that is really the main thing, is for things that are going wrong to being able to be heard where they need to be heard, and not squashed down.
So here's where I'm coming from when I hear you describe this story, and I typically have not come in with large systems frames. So I think, when you hear about, the lower level of this is like people are pissed off with each other, and so there's sort of individual psychological interventions we could do. We could do wellness, we could do movie nights, we could do appreciation and gifts and things like that, right? So I would come in at the next level higher and say, okay, what I'm seeing in this organization are issues of alignment, respect, and trust. And that's kind of how I would go in. But I can feel how that's already a little bit squishy. Like it's sort of like the gears are old and they're slipping. Whereas your model of strategy, operation, and governance feels like it gets to the levels that I'm talking about: alignment, respect, and trust, and the levels of experience, disengaged, unhappy, but in a much more comprehensive and reliable way. So does that sound like I understand what you're talking about?
Yes, I think what you're touching on with alignment, respect, and trust comes into part of the governance framework that was instituted, where indeed it recognized that everyone has the capacity, despite any rank on shoulder or whatever else, because it was a defense organization, that if you see something, say something, and that actually then just lets the air out of the otherwise power inequalities, and that they were as expected to have alignment with the overall outcome. They were expected to have respect for juniors saying, "Hey sir, this isn't working," or "Hey sir, what you're asking of me will create a problem because," and then the trust that emerges from those conversations is something that then enables the collaboration to actually be seen and lived, and not just be something that's often talked about, but then rarely actually happens.
And in other organizations, in other situations, those three words might be different, right? They might,
yes,
right. But you get at them by looking. So I'm starting to appreciate.
But I think actually in many organizations, that, those are almost universals, right? That why are you in this organization if you're not aligned with what it's doing? Why are you in this organization if you're not, if the meaning you're deriving isn't aligned with the meaning that the organization holds? Maybe there's a message there for you to find another job that aligns with the meaning that you're seeking in the world. But equally, and even more strongly, when people are aligned with meaningful work, then their loyalty increases, their capacity to speak up and contribute just amplifies extraordinarily.
Yeah, and I think what I'm starting to understand is that at the level that you're talking about, you have a lot more tools at your disposal. So if I want to go in and someone says, hey, I need to increase trust in the organization, and that's the level at which I'm analyzing and solving, that's kind of a big squishy water balloon. Why? Whereas
in fact, it's an emergent property, so which it's a very entangled issue, and so entangled that you will never really be able to explore cause and effect.
Yeah, because also, if I come down to sort of the three things we want in life, so if we have alignment, respect, and trust, I might say, well, then the people in this organization will experience, love, peace, joy, right? Which also we might say are universals, but they're like hyper emergent or emergent squared.
That's true. And why, generally, I think that it's difficult to put them up as being that they're along the lines of truth, beauty, and goodness. But I think that they're inherent in most of us.
Yeah,
not all of us in some way.
But as you say, trying to change emergent properties by focusing on them themselves is, I can't remember where I heard this metaphor recently, but it's like trying to change the workings of the factory by dealing with the smoke coming out of the smokestack.
Well, that's not a bad metaphor. Yeah. No, that works.
Okay, yeah. So we've got our Venn diagram of the three words: strategy, operation, and governance.
What I like about strategy, operations, and governance is that it's about what are you going to change from whatever situation you're in. The thinking that got you there won't get you beyond that. So what are you going to change about your thinking? What you've been doing all along. The status quo is no longer adequate to take you forward. So what are you going to do that's different? And then how are you going to control the behavior and the thinking, because it needs to both need to keep moving forward. And that's the control issue. It's not control over, but therefore shifts to control with, because you want to create a learning relationship amongst them, and that's why I talk about these things must be forever connected. So how is about connection, and because you never want strategy and execution to be apart, and too often we see an extraordinary gap between the two, and governance tries to fill it, and it fails.
So what I'm picturing in my head when you say control, which is a word that I naturally chafe against, right? Just semantically, but I'm thinking something more cybernetic, right? If, like the feedback, the naturalistic feedback.
Sure, that's part and parcel of it. I perhaps it's just the systems thinker, systems engineer in me, but if we weren't able to control energy in our bodies, then we just wouldn't exist as living organisms. So control is the essence of life. So it's how it's exercised is what we should be most concerned with. And if it's done well, like within our bodies, then largely we don't need to think about it. It's happening autonomically. So if you think about the control that's happening within your heart, like your heart, you're going into, go for a bit of a run, the heart beats faster, blood pumps faster, etc. Endorphins and whatever else are released, and so on and so forth. But all of that is happening within the body, and you're not consciously controlling it. So what is the analog for organizations that enable us to achieve that same level of autonomous control? And then that'll leave people able to do meaningful work and to contribute to the future direction of the enterprise. So that's really why I get quite attached to the notion of control when you look at it as being the essence of life and organizations being living things. But I understand why it would chafe you, right? Yeah. In fact, I was sitting in a systems thinking round table 2 years ago at an international conference, and one of the systems engineers around the table had exactly your reaction and said, well, actually, I think we should go further and actually not use the word in our community. But, thank God we do have an essence of control because it's part and parcel of flying, driving, living. We need control surfaces and we need to think about them as we work within the organization as much as we don't think about them within our own very existence as a human.
Okay. I'll buy that.
Right.
I'll buy that for now. I'll dream on it.
Yeah, come back to me, Howie. Right. So then you go, well, look, that's all right. Big picture stuff, big hands, small map. How do we actually get down to something that's a little more work? And then you look at the what. So there I'm taking up things around the operations, strategy, and governance. Now I've got to try and hope that I remember, and I'm drawing 9 boxes above them.
Okay. Do you want to put your tablet on the screen?
Oh, yeah. Oh, what a good idea. Excuse me. And for each of these, I'm saying, so what are, when we think about operations, then what are the sorts of things that we might be concerned with? And, one might be indeed, you could think of it as, I don't want to use blue. Production control, which is really about all of the information and communications that is required. So if people don't like production control, they could think of it as the information and communications needed to actually synchronize across different work units, right? Because we're all working towards that same goal. And then you could think about the actual management function or the overall operations control in a sense. But this is that part of an enterprise where a manager, is the point, a point of integration across the different work units. And it's almost like the first point of integration across different work units. And then think about the assessment functions, because you can't do the management unless you've got some form of assessment channels coming back into you. So, the sort of measures that you're putting in place and the like become absolutely crucial to that. Then, and so what I'm trying to build out here, and without getting, is just the next level of detail down, and no more than three main, and they're almost like folders of activities that of concern that we would want to explore. And then from the strategy perspective, well, there would be the actual planning function and how that occurs, and equally the some concern about the future state, because too often there's not enough thinking done outside of the current constraints. So it's how one actually thinks beyond the system that you're actually in. and I am now. Oh yes. Then there is. I think here is the overall system design, so that you're actually maintaining a perspective of the changing state of the organization, right? As if it were a system in its own right. And often that's a reasonable expectation. But too often we see enterprises and even small businesses, well, it's easier with small businesses to have and maintain a view of how the whole hangs together and how it all works. But as organizations and enterprises get bigger, then they've lost all sight of how it actually works. And if people are asked how it works, what's the first thing they bring up? Their organization chart. And that's not how it works. That's not the system design. And people then become, whatever little box they fit in within that organization chart, and because they've lost the relationships amongst the parts.
That's really interesting, because I was talking to a friend who's a systems thinker and also very interested in cancer, and his definition of cancer is just what you said. It's an entity that's forgotten its relationship to the parts.
Right. Yes. Absolutely right. Yes, indeed. And that often, and a lot of times, I don't know quite what health services are like there, but as health services get squeezed and even more squeezed across the world, and I know it's a sort of a global problem, the amount of time that you can buy with your general practitioner, who typically is the person who has the whole of you view, you risk them treating one ailment, forgetting about the indications for other elements. And my mother suffered that before she died, in terms of treatments from the cardiologist, treatments from the kidney specialist, and they were working against each other. And it was only when her general practitioner said, "Oi, you two specialists, we need a conference around here because you're fighting against each other, and my patient's body is suffering in the middle." So, but who is that general practitioner in an organization?
And that's what you mean by the systems.
The system design. So if you think, a general practitioner is seen as sometimes almost like an entry level And I'm pleased in Australia that they've now said that general practice is a specialisation in its own right. Because it's crucial, and they describe themselves here as specialists in life. And that they have to understand, like every other specialist, how the human body works, how it's connected, before they're allowed to conduct one intervention on a human. However, in the world of business, there's no general practitioner, there's no general medical training or general organisational training on how an organisation works. They don't know too often. And you wouldn't let a doctor near you that hadn't bloody passed their anatomy and physiology.
So in other words, that any group of people getting together for some common purpose will have emergent properties. And they can vary wildly based on who's the a personality or the butterfly effect of how something was decided very haphazardly at the beginning. And so when you're talking about control, about sort of noticing and being intentional, so that you get the emergent properties you want, rather than what we see in most organizations is people who are disengaged, giant corporations, untouched by the damage they're doing around the world. And accountable only to people who care about quarterly earnings.
Right on. And so that is just the short-termism that happens. And within this model, that's really where this space over here in the management, if that is just driving, I'm not sure if you could see that, but I've coloured in there the management piece. If that's just driven by short-term earnings, then none of this really matters. None of this really matters, and that is really part of the problem, and why you end up with a gap between strategy and execution. Is that everything then is seen as short-term. And that is part of the, that management concern is a very, reasonable and valid concern. Business is in it for profit, but if it's being constrained or, restrained to maximizing profit, then really it doesn't matter too much. All of these future states and system design issues fall by the way because the pressures of short-term performance outweigh the investment required to reap longer-term benefits.
Yeah, well, it reminds me when I was a distance runner, and I'd run a marathon, and my body would make very different decisions as I was depleting it in the marathon.
Right.
All of a sudden, things like blood glucose became emergencies, and hydration became an emergency, and tissue repair became an emergency. And so I'd always get sick afterwards because all these functions had been, repair and long-term maintenance, immune function, all of these were shot to hell because Q4, the body was in short-term survival mode. And
there we are.
It's
and
understandable.
it was just simply managing within the constraints that you were giving it.
Yeah, but
like
running a marathon is it's ironic, but it's an extremely short-term activity.
Mate, I'll take your word for it. I think the longest I've run is 5 miles, and I was half the age that I am now.
It's a very civilized distance. I recommend it.
Yeah, and I also, was brought up believing that walking is God's exercise. So whether or not that's true, it works for my wife and I.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Michael Gelb, just wrote a book called Walking Well. about the
Walking well.
walking
Yeah.
well, about the physical and spiritual, psychological, cognitive benefits of walking. It just came out, so I'm looking forward to including that. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. All right. In the governance, just to finish off these last three, and I'll come back to the chart, then one of the crucial things around governance before you can control everything, and if you remember what we did in the story within the defense environment, was actually set a strategic outcome for the governance function. But it actually is about policy and identity. And I probably should put those words around the other way. That identity comes first, and then the policy frameworks that sit under that to regulate behaviours towards living the identity, and so that people, gain meaning from that. And if that sense doesn't capture the meaning, then pretty much all else fails.
So when you say identity, do you mean the identity of the organization, like this is what we stand for, or the identity of the individual members, or both? Or
Well, this is at an organisational level, the organisational identity, and from that, identity, then they were able to draw. When it came down to looking at the operations, that first box we filled in, then they were able to draw another three-circle Venn that really means that for everything that goes in the water, it's got to be able to float, move, and fight. Right? And that then helped provide a simple framework around it's not enough, like for most boats, to be able to float and move, but you've actually got to be able to put it in harm's way and do dangerous things with it and keep people alive while you do that. And that just changed then the operational environment and made that so that then was how the identity flowed down through into the next level of thinking.
I imagine that conversation generally involves trade-offs, right? Like I would think move and fight might it's like a fan. Like where I was just shopping for like a fan that blows air, and the ones I wanted were big and loud, so that's not going to work in my office. But like now you have people having to have conversations about move and fight, right? They seem like, the faster it moves, maybe the lighter it is, the less armoring or the fewer weapons systems it has.
That's right. And even how many people you put on board, because that means then that you need room for berths and accommodations and messing and versus ammunition. And so there's a trade-off between, so then which systems do you automate and which systems need the person in the loop, and that is the constant trade-off. But we're all making these trade-offs through life, right? And therefore the identity is crucial, because and in the military they have something called the commander's intent, and that is a statement of outcome and of the goals that they're seeking to achieve by a particular time. But it enables all of the decision makers underneath the commander to, when they come up with making these compromises, to say, but if I'm not sure, then which of those compromises takes me closest to the commander's intent? And that is derived from the overall identity frame. So, I've written last month a piece as a LinkedIn article called The Leadership Covenant, and it tries to take that very idea out into the world for people to state very clearly how they conceive value, how they contribute value, and how they count value, and speak to that, because then people understand really their identity, and are then able to see and invoke meaning for why they see people doing certain things. You go, oh, yeah, but he's or seeking to be as sustainable as possible on the plot of land that he and his wife are living on.
Got it. All right. I think I'm good with the what. So
Okay, and then there is, the strategic communications, because whereas the communications over here was helping with the management.
Oh, would you go back to the tablet?
I beg your pardon. There's communication, and this is more about internal communications and information exchange that enables management and operational control. This is about communication for awareness and understanding externally. But I'm I'll have to admit, Howie, I knew I'd forget one, but I think that, and I forget the label, but I'm going to put up here, and it from a Greek word, an algedonic system, and what that really is driving towards is that need for an immediate response. There's danger, boom, and so that is able to go straight up to the headquarters, or a sign from the brain, and so an algedonic system within ourselves is that if we brush past something and it's really hot, then we tend to jump away. So that signal's gone very rapidly to the brain and we have reacted. Well, what is that sort of bushfire alarm in an organization that goes, but if that little thing breaks, we need to know about it up here straight away, because it's so critical, and the domino effect could be that we need to have a response put through the organization rapidly. We can't wait for the dominoes to fall. So it's that sort of strategic and instantaneous alert and response mechanism.
Now, is that a matter of judgment, of getting the right people in the right roles? Like, what came to me was some Cold War scenario where a bird flies across the screen and someone is in the silo and their job is to press the button and start World War III.
No, that's a little more strategic, I would have thought, in that particular example. I was just thinking, because as you talk about emergent properties, and the thing about emergent properties is that they're non-predictive. You can't predict that you're actually going to get. You can probe and sense and respond to see whether or not the adjustments you've made within your organization is actually going to give you this cultural change or this emergent change that you're seeking. Because everything is so entangled, and you don't know whether you're actually touching the right levers with the right people to being able to achieve the outcome. And I think this notion of an algedonic system really is it tries to build in some of that autonomic response, so that that's equivalent to being within. Try and think. If you get a fright, then there's a shot of adrenaline released into the system. Boom. So that you can do extraordinary things, like some people have, seen a car collapse on a child and been able to lift the whole weight of the car and drag the child out rapidly. And it's that sort of response that needs to be, and typically designed into a system in a way that there's some redundancy within a system. But too often in organizations today, there's no redundancy. It's seen as inefficient. And so, areas are cut out, which, it's pretty much strips muscle off the bone. You hear people in organizations say, yeah, we're down to the bone. And so it is part physical, but also part of the extent to which people actually work together to being able to do it. And that you won't suddenly get people working together. But if you've had a lot of practice in an organization being collaborative, then when a crisis occurs, they can do the equivalent of lifting the car. But that signal would have gone to the headquarters in almost instantaneous, that if it's this, I need to know about it, bang. But at the same time, these people haven't waited for the response. They've reacted in a way that was expected of them, and then the people haven't gone, hey, why aren't you doing your job? Why are you over them helping them? They've gone, yeah, of course you're over there helping them.
So I'm trying to understand this with a limited mind. So what's coming up for me is sort of the relationship between perception, cognition, and like the amygdala and the limbic brain. That I have ducked to avoid a flying object before my eyes have even seen it.
Well, it has seen it, but you haven't registered it.
Right. So before I'm aware. Before I'm aware of seeing it.
Yes, that's right. Before you're aware that you've seen it.
Right.
And that's where, that whole... And that's a pretty good, singular example of what we're talking about. There was that that's part of the algedonic system. You go, well, look, if I stand still, that brick could hit me on the temple and kill me, versus, crikey, get out the way. And then you go, bloody hell, what was that? You hadn't even registered it was a brick until it broke into 3 parts on the ground in front of you.
Yeah, but it could also be a bird or the or the shadow of an airplane. So that's what I'm kind of curious about, is how do the speed, the immediacy, and the extent of the response, when we know that so many of our perceptions turn out to be based on past fears and constructs and images rather than reality. So I'm wondering how you bake effective algedonic, I've never heard that word before, but I'm really liking it on my tongue, how you bake that effectively into organizations, and that's why I asked about judgment. So
you do simulations. In defense, they do wargaming all the time, but run managers through scenarios, not to say, hey, this will happen, but if it did, what would you do? And those are, absolutely crucial, because they learn a set of behaviors around the need to collaborate in order to resolve a particular issue, where collaboration slowly gets baked in to the organization as to, yes, of course, I see this coming, and I need to go and speak to, cut out the hierarchy and close the loop on that pronto. And cybersecurity may be the biggest threat. Well, it is the biggest threat, but it's not just about systems, right? If there's a penetration in the system, then who finds it? Is it on my desk? Is it on yours? And how did it get past the CTO? Well, those are all questions that get answered in the review, but it's what happens, what I do about it when my screen starts playing silly buggers, and I believe that there's a cyber threat at play.
So it's almost like
how do I respond to that rapidly to close the systems down, and close it down before you've got CEO or board approval.
So it's like the Secret Service tackling the president.
There you go, absolutely. But they practice that time and time again.
I wonder if the president does. I'm pretty sure the Secret Service do. I wonder how good presidents are at getting tackled.
Well, I guess you'd go gently on an 80-year-old. Yes, particularly if some of these Secret Service agents are bloody, linebackers or something that built like a brick shithouse, as we would say in Australia. So that then, as we come back to this, gives us a view of what we need to think about. What we need to think about across the domains that need to stay connected in order to deliver on this outcome. And that we can see that how each of these elements help contribute to achieving compliance and then getting the shift to more collaborative behaviors. Now, the last one I'm intentionally not going to do a lot on, but for each of those, let me switch that on. We can do this just to begin with, at the I'm going to put, say, strategy in here. Let me blow it up a bit. Strategy in there. And that when that shows up poorly, could you give me one word that shapes that? And when it shows up exceptionally well, what does that look like? And what I might be able to say here is that strategy is, in fact, I'll use their word, ad hoc. That there's almost no strategy in existence at all. And but when it's working well, then it is indeed collaborative and coherent. And you can play with these words. Some people like to use dynamic because strategy, like operations, is constantly moving. Then the question arises is, so in order to get from where we are to there, is there one word or one main thing that we would need to do to actually shift that, to actually shift from an ad hoc framework to something that's quite dynamic? And we would do that for each of these, and so you would create a situation of going, well, we will successfully move from the pink to the green by doing, if we do transformation T1, and that could be, in that particular case, having, and I will say, actually having an overall view of the system design being the crucial thing. Of all the things that we could do, that is perhaps the most crucial, because with that system design in place, then we can think about better integration of planning and thinking of the future state. And you repeat that for operations, you repeat that for governance, and again, you'd move from one condition to the better with your designed transformation. I'll just label them as T2 and T3 in this case. And then you've got a set of actions here that, if they are successfully executed, should drive the shift that you're looking for in getting people to feeling and acting as though they're, less in a constabulary organization and far more a partner in the progress of meaningful governance of a maritime system. Now, each of those can be broken down, of course, because for each of those 9 boxes, you can do subsets of that underneath, so that you can get into far more detail that you would need to do for such a large-scale transformation. But on a smaller scale, you can just take the conversation from the 3 main circles on the how. So you're checking then as to whether or not people, as they're transformed, can still see their place in the larger world, and indeed evaluate their contribution towards achieving the desired change and meaning that they're seeking in life.
Well, this is a lot.
Yeah, but the thing is, you see, it is a long conversation, but there are no simple answers, right? That we are working in a complex world, and that you will hear people talk about it being, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, VUCA world.
Yeah.
There's a better acronym, actually, and it's TUNA.
Yeah.
And that's turbulent, uncertain, novel, and ambiguous. And what I like about TUNA over VUCA is that novelty that it brings in, because it's the emergent property that you're seeking will be novel. That's the change that you wanted. So you're introducing novelty. And the world will change as a consequence of that, and create novelty because of the change that you're seeking, so that it needs to be, a constant dynamic. And therefore a conversation needs to keep going. And that whilst it's a lot, one last shot of the chart, one needs to keep revisiting this in a constant loop, right? That and that's how you make progress.
All right. So where my mind is going is, so when I work with organizations, this is tremendously helpful, and I'm also trying to translate some of these, business jargon terms into, say, an individual or a family, a community, a sports team, anywhere humans congregate. I'm afraid I don't have time for it now. I have other appointments,
Yes.
and frankly, my brain is full. So I don't know. I would just start nodding. If you talk more, I would just nod and drool at this point.
But it still comes down to asking why questions to derive meaning, exploring how that community or family it connects and how they connect and stay connected, what it is that you want to change, and ideally co-create that. And then have the question, well, if we did this, because now you're getting buy-in, if we did this, do we think that would achieve that? So, well, let's give it a go. There's the little experiment. Yes, that worked. Should we do it again? And away you go, around and around.
Yeah, and I'm remembering, your tagline, no problem too big. And what's emerging from this conversation for me is no part too small, too insignificant. No person,
Oh no.
right? That
In
it's,
fact, I would, yeah, I'd ask you to underline that, because what I would like individuals to think is that, you matter more than you think, which was one of the points from our last conversation. You matter more than you think, because if you see your place in that you have a view on how to improve even just one part of what we've been talking about, then you're a vital cog in the wheel.
yeah, anything that's excluded is going to be a drag on the system.
That's it.
I got it.
But you also have the opportunity in that, and your contribution might be to getting rid of stupid stuff, because a lot of people are in their organization and they understand what's not working and why. Well, speak up. Let's just say, instead of starting this, what if we just stopped doing these two things?
Yeah. Beautiful. Richard, thank you so much. I feel like there's a PhD in here. We just, I know with your tablet, you can zoom in and in and in and in. I feel like that's a metaphor for how deep this goes, and how much sensitivity and skill a person could develop while making the world a better place and solving hard problems.
That's right.
So,
and that there's scope for everyone to grow in this.
yeah. So before we go, tell folks where they can find you, and who might seek you out for help.
Well, I mentor and teach in this sort of systems thinking and helping people be commercially smart in a complex world. My website is underneath my name on the screen, www.drrichardhodge.com. And there's an inquiry form through there if you'd love to reach out. There's plenty of materials on my website as well that are accessible, and the opportunity also to subscribe to my mostly monthly, sometimes weekly newsletter.
Ah. Okay. And the doctor in drrichardhodge.com is just two letters, DR.
DR, that's correct.
Great. Richard, thank you so much. And
It's been an absolute joy, Howie.
yeah, well, let's keep it going, and solve the world's problems.
Yeah, that's right. At least make progress, right? I don't know whether we'll get to solve them, because that loop will continue to go.
Okay, so there'll be employment.
That's it exactly, and why we need humans over AI.
Oh, right on. That's another conversation for another day, I think.
It is indeed.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Take care.
Cheers now. Bye-bye.